Hi everybody, and welcome back to my channel, Healing Through Christ. I've been gone for a while, but now I am back. Wow, a lot has happened since I was gone. So, the first thing that I want to address real quick is the Charlie Kirk assassination, which is ultimately spiritual. It is a clear sign of spiritual warfare. Okay, it is ultimately demonic. There is just no getting around it. Okay? So, the way, I mean, listen, look at the way all these people are celebrating the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I mean, that is not normal in any way. Okay, I mean, 10 years ago, this this would have been unacceptable. At least I hope it would have been. I don't think it would have been celebrated as much as it is now. I mean, this right here would be unacceptable. So, clearly, the clearly this was a demonic influence. See, the mainstream media is being used by, and all these other influencers and stuff. They're using the mainstream media to push these narratives and stuff that opens the door for demonic influence. Because a lot of these narratives are false accusations. Okay? When you look up the word devil in the Bible, and in the New Testament, when it's referring to Satan, it comes from a Greek word that means false accuser. False accuser. Okay? And that is where we get the English word diabolical from that same Greek word. And I had to mention when we had to bring up Satan, like the word devil referring to Satan, because I believe in the King James translation, the word devil, okay, there is a devil and devils, so it's like, okay, in the New King James, a lot of translations where it might say demon, King James Version would say devils instead, referring to demons. Okay? So, I had to make a distinction between the two. Yeah, okay, so the word devil means slanderer, false accuser. And notice how people are reacting to Charlie Kirk's death. Notice the things they're saying about him to justify it. Notice how much of that is false, it's misinformation. None of that stuff is true. And even if it was true, hypothetically speaking, it wouldn't justify the assassination of Charlie Kirk, even if it was true. Okay? So yeah, this is a very spiritual today. This is very demonic. I recommend checking out Jonathan Kahn's video. He can go over it in a lot better way than I can, and he does a lot better explaining that side of things than I do, than I can. So he can go very deep into that, and even deeper than I can. And it's very interesting to see that he's shown. And everybody knows that it is demonic, but and the sign, again, is right there. People are accusing him of being racist and being every kind of phobic. And incidentally, the things that are saying about him to justify that, they're saying that about all conservative Christians who are Trump supporters, and maybe even Trump supporters in general. Okay, so we are in a spiritual battle, and I have seen on social media lately, on Twitter or X, for months of people on the left openly calling for violence, celebrating violence, and all that stuff. I mean, all that is demonic. So it is demonic influence operating through these people. However, people are still responsible for it though, because it starts off as just a thought in your mind. Okay? And then you decide how to respond to that thought. Your response to that thought in your mind is what determines what happens next. If you decide to entertain that thought, then it grows, and it grows, and it grows. So it just keeps on growing, and eventually, depending on what the thought is, like in this case, the assassination, openly calling for the assassination of Trump or Elon Musk or whoever else, and people are getting ideas. And also constantly referring to people as Nazis just because they disagree with you. And then I've seen a post a couple months ago that said the only good Nazi is a dead Nazi. So if you're going around throwing out the word Nazi lately, throwing the word Nazi around, and calling a certain group of people Nazi, and then you make a post that says the only good Nazi is a dead Nazi, then you are calling for their assassination. You are inciting violence against that group of people, but you're doing it kind of vaguely, and which is very clever because because a lot of people might agree with the initial statement if we're talking about the original Nazis, and that's a whole different debate altogether. But from a biblical perspective, the Bible teaches us to love our enemies and to pray for our enemies and all that stuff. So we're not even supposed to hate as Christians, we're not supposed to hate actual Nazis, who I don't believe are even around anymore. And if some of them are still around, they must be getting up in years. They must be pushing 100. If some of them are still around. So yeah, they're getting pretty up there in years. But they are no longer a threat to us. So they are referring to a certain group of people as Nazis. Again, what is that? That is an accusation. That is a false accusation, and it once again goes back to the devil, to the word devil. It proves that these people are under demonic influence to some extent. Okay? And I have seen people blindly believe anything negative they hear about Trump, about Elon Musk, about Charlie Kirk, pretty much anybody that they don't like. I mean, this is spiritual. And then when it comes to people that they do like, they hear something negative, all of a sudden, they want to see evidence. Think about something. I mean, I think that the reason that the left is hard to reason with a lot of times is because they are under demonic influence. Okay, they are under a spiritual stronghold. Now, we can look up the word stronghold. The Greek word that's translated as strongholds, and I can think of the reference. Is it 1 Corinthians? I think 2 Corinthians 5, where it talks about our weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty for pulling down strongholds. So, I forget the exact reference. If I remember it, I'll put it up there on the screen. So anyway, so with the word stronghold, we can look it up, can refer to a mindset. Then you go down, casting down. Some translations might say imaginations. Other translations might say arguments. Now, given the context and associated meaning, I feel like the word argument is going to be more associated with apologetics. And because of that right there, I believe that imaginations would be a better translation. And then taking captivity of every thought in your mind. So it's almost as if it's almost as if a spiritual stronghold is sort of being demonically brainwashed or something, or they're pretty close to being demonically brainwashed. Okay, when you look at where stronghold is can refer to a mindset, imaginations, thoughts. So this means that demonic spirits can place thoughts in your mind. Okay, some people might use that verse in Ephesians 6, I think verse 16, where it talks about taking up the shield of faith to quench the fiery darts of the enemies. However, if you look up the term fiery darts, it is referring to an intense pang of emotion. So, yeah, which the demonic spirits can plant emotions on you too. Okay, so, and now there's something else that I've been thinking about lately. I don't know if I mentioned it before I take my break, or whatever you want to call it. I don't know if I brought it up or even thought about it at the time, but lately I've been thinking about something. About Ephesians 6:12, the first line. So I don't remember if I brought it up in previous videos. But if the first part of Ephesians 6:12 sticks out to me, the very first part. We war not against flesh and blood. Now, why would it be necessary to point that out? Unless it looked like you were. Because whenever you're dealing with paranormal activity, it is quite obvious that you are not dealing with flesh and blood. Okay? Therefore, if it looks like you are dealing with flesh and blood, and it's necessary to point that out, that we do not war against flesh and blood, then that tells me that that this initial verse has nothing to do with the paranormal. There are verses in the Bible that mentions that well, I wouldn't say it mentions it, but more like describes it or alludes to it, because the word paranormal does not appear in the Bible at all, but there is scripture that describes it and deals with it. But I'm saving that for a different video. Okay, but what I'm getting at here is this right here, the first line, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, makes it perfectly clear that people are not a problem. Why? The only reason it would be necessary to point that out is if outward appearances made it look like that people were the problem. Okay? The only reason outward appearances would, so that means that, then it goes on to say that who our enemies are. So what it's saying is, these spiritual forces of evil, the spiritual kingdom of darkness, will operate through these people who are acting like your enemy, who are acting hateful towards you, who are doing these evil things to you. Okay? A haunted house, paranormal activity is not an example of, it is not an example of, Ephesians 6:12, what that is talking about. Charlie Kirk's assassination is an example of Ephesians 6:12. Okay? Especially considering reports that there may have been witchcraft involved, like somebody may have hired witches to place a curse on Charlie Kirk. Those forces are real. These things do happen. That's the reality of it. If you don't know anything about spiritual warfare, okay. So there were demonic spirits behind all this. Probably the one influenced whoever hired those witches to place a curse on them in the first place. Now, once again, I encourage you to check out Jonathan Cahn's videos. recent videos about that, because he goes into it a lot more than I do. He can go deeper than I can. He knows a lot more than I can. And yeah, that is really interesting. What things that he has to say, and it exposes a lot of he exposes the exact spirit that's behind it. Okay. So yeah, that is it for this video. Bye.